839-1122.
Brian, don't be jealous that I've been chatting online with Dave all day.
Your place for a Baylor take on your lunch break. Here's Drake Toll.
And welcome back into Up Tempo. We are right now joined by a very special guest, Shehan Jeyarajah of Dave Campbell's Texas Football. He's the college insider there, meaning he covers everything college football in the great state of Texas, which is not a small task by any means. First of all, Shehan, how you doing, man? Thanks for coming on.
I'm doing fantastic. We're right in the middle of magazine season, so it's a busy time for us, but it's a fun time, right?
Yeah, I would imagine that. I mean, working at Dave Campbell's Texas Football, I'm sure there's no shortage of excitement, especially with all that's going on right now with Sam Houston having won the national championship. Was that just anarchy for you?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. So I was back there over on Sunday. I mean, it was just an incredible game. The first half of the game for people who didn't watch was just absolutely rain-soaked. Nobody could really do much of anything. And then all of a sudden they go into break, they come out. And look, my thought was Sam Houston, they've got a very explosive passing offense in addition to a great running game, great defense. I thought if they could get something going in the passing game, if things kind of dried down a little bit, they'd have a real good shot to win the game. And you see them coming down. They score a game-winning touchdown with 15 seconds left. I mean, listen, that's what championship dreams are made of, right? Is the opportunity to throw a game-winning touchdown like that.
Man, it was awesome. We had Garrett Rose on the program not too long ago, the crying Sam Houston State fan. And I mean, it was just embodying the fanhood that is only found in the state of Texas. And now speaking of, I guess, hopefully championship aspirations, maybe I'm getting ahead of myself. You're a Baylor alum, is that correct?
Yes, back in 2016.
Okay, good, because I just want to make sure. I know we're probably going to get some heat here for potential bias. Like, that's out there. He's a Baylor alum. We can talk about it. We're not hiding from that. But, man, just right off the bat, what are your thoughts on the spring season wrapping up here? I mean, I don't know how much you can really put into a spring with a new staff, but what were some of your takeaways?
Yeah, well, the first thing that I'll say is that I thought that Dave Aranda was a lot more decisive after what happened last year than I thought that he would be. I mean, especially, I think it would be very easy for him to just write everything off as a COVID year. But he was very decisive right from the start that, we're going to go out there, we're going to try to fix things. We kind of feel like, obviously with the offensive staff, that things didn't really come together. And actually, I had a great chat with him for the magazine, for the Baylor preview, and might have a piece coming out in addition to that. And, one thing that really got to me was he was very willing to admit when he was wrong. He felt like what we were trying to do last year on offense, especially, we tried to run a lot of inside zone. We tried to, really build our offense around that. And looking at the way the Big 12 plays defense, it's just not a good fit. And so he was willing to say, we're going to get rid of Larry Fedora, who's obviously a very well thought of offensive coach. We're willing to get rid of George Munoz, who was a big hire for Baylor. And we're willing to get rid of Joe Wickline, who, again, a longtime veteran offensive line coach. We're willing to take a chance. We're going to bring in a guy from BYU who obviously had a lot of success last year, but not at this level. And so I think that everybody just feels in that program, they just feel very aligned in a way that I don't think that they did through a lot of last season. And I think that's really showed up in practice. I think that, this doesn't feel like a team that just came off of 2-7. I think that that everybody's still very confident, very excited about what they've got there. And look, the problem is not talent. I think we all know that after seeing Baylor, go 11-1 not that long ago. So I'm pretty excited about what Dave Aranda has been able to do this spring. It has to translate to the field, obviously, and I think we're going to face as tough of a Big 12 as any in this upcoming season. But I think Baylor's in a good spot.
I'm so glad you said that. The fact that he cleaned house after year one at least communicated to me, hey, we want to win now. We're not just trying to rebuild. Like, he wants to win next season. And there's a lot of murmurs, I feel like, especially after 2-7 season of, can he be a head coach? Does he have the personality to be a head coach? What was your assessment of that in the spring? You touched on that a little bit, but is he the guy for Baylor?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, right? I mean, he is as different a head coach as I've ever talked to. I mean, really, at any level almost. I mean, he's kind of a normal dude. He's very much an introvert. He's very thoughtful. I mean, one thing, I don't want to give too much away, but, one thing that he told me was that, when he went and was a grad assistant over at Texas Tech, a lot of grad assistants, when you're coming up through the college football world, you major in sports management or kinesiology or, something very easy, right? Well, Dave Aranda, majored in philosophy or got his master's in philosophy. So, I mean, that's not what you're usually asking your coaches who coach under Mike Leach. That's not usually what you're thinking. And so I thought that kind of just said a lot about him. He's a very thoughtful guy. And yeah, I mean, I think that there isn't a model necessarily for Dave Aranda. I mean, a lot of people have said Tony Dungy, maybe there's something there with that, but I think he's kind of his own man, in a lot of ways. And, the one thing that I'll say is that I think that not being that rally the troops type like Matt Rule was, I think that you have to lead a different way. And I think it has to be built through long-term relationships. I think it's about hiring people around you who, first of all, you believe in, but also believe in you. And I think that it's being very clear and communicating very well about what you're trying to accomplish. And I think that he's doing the work to do that. Now, again, that didn't happen last season. I mean, again, the margin for error when you kind of have that kind of strategy, in my opinion, is a little smaller than kind of, getting a guy who everybody's going to run through a wall for, right? But I think that that's a formula that I think is going to be a long-term success if he's able to pull it off. I think it's a foundational thing. I think it requires you from 1 through 85, from every staff member to be on the same page. I think he's willing to put in the work to do that. And so, look, I think that you look at last year, and I mean, when things go wrong, they go wrong. But I think that he's doing a lot of things right in terms of building the foundation there.
I'm so glad that you juxtapose Matt Rule kind of being that fiery personality, very outspoken, kind of the rah-rah guy, and then you have the philosopher with Dave Aranda. How have you seen that impact his recruiting? Obviously, it's been serviceable in the transfer portal as of late, just picking up a big commitment from Jacob Gall in the grad transfer fashion. What is your assessment of him as a recruiter as it pertains to that?
Yeah, it's been really interesting. I thought that they've been very kind of ahead, if that makes sense. I think that they have gotten to guys really early, and I think the Rule staff did a really good job of this too in a different way. But I think that they've really identified very quickly what they want. I think they're willing to go to untraditional places to get it. I mean, going to Alabama to get a quarterback when you're in the state of Texas, that's pretty unusual, right? I mean, that's not something that most programs in the state of Texas are doing, especially kind of being as decisive as they were that, like, this is our guy, right? And so I think in a lot of ways, they're looking for their archetypes. They're looking for guys who fit what they want. They're looking for guys who they believe in, both on and off the field. And I think, look, I think Baylor long-term to kind of be the type of program that Dave Aranda wants them to be, they are going to have to start winning some of these battles that they're not winning right now, right? But that's a 2-year, 3-year, 4-year, sort of thing, right? I mean, Matt Rule didn't win all those battles in year 1. You really saw when he got to year 3, okay, all of a sudden some people are interested, right? And so I think it's been an interesting build. I think they're looking very developmentally. And, another thing that he kind of mentioned, again, Dave Aranda, such an interesting person to talk to. He kind of juxtaposed the two places that he worked at before, LSU versus Wisconsin. And, LSU is a plug-and-play type league, right? I mean, you get the athletes, you plug them in, they go. At Wisconsin, you're kind of trying to build guys up. And obviously, you're kind of going for math, with these Midwestern kids. And at Baylor, I think he kind of feels like he can kind of do something in between. He wants to get these kids who have the physicals there, and he wants to build them into better football players. So I think that they're really starting to find their stride in terms of finding those guys. Again, to compete with the Oklahomas, the Texas A&Ms in the state, you got to win some of those big battles too. But I think that in terms of building, again, the type of roster 1 through 85 that you need to be able to be competitive in college football, I think he's off to a great start.
And it feels like that great start is being perpetuated by the transfer portal with the additions of Grant Miller from Vanderbilt. And now, like I mentioned, Jacob Gall from Buffalo. I personally was anti-transfer portal to begin with on the offensive line because I was like, hey, you already missed spring. That's a lot to ask a kid to come in here to a new scheme, a new system, and he's 15 practices behind all these guys. How big a get was it to have a guy from Buffalo who's already been in the wide zone scheme? And I mean, how huge is that to get a guy like Jacob Gall who is coming so highly touted?
Right. And I think that you mentioned that, right? The scheme changing, and you've got a guy in Jacob Gall now who is one of the only players on the whole roster who knows how to play this scheme, especially on the offensive line. And, talking to Jeff Grimes over the offseason, one thing that's very clear is that, it takes a certain type of lineman and it takes a certain type of mentality to play that wide zone scheme. You don't have to be big. You don't have to be strong. Those are nice. Obviously, you want all of the characteristics in an offensive lineman, but what you want more than anything is decisiveness and mobility. And I think that Jacob Gall, he was rated the #1 left guard in America by Pro Football Focus. That's a big deal. I mean, and what Pro Football Focus, what they're looking at is they're looking, hey, this is what you were asked to do on this play. Did you execute it at a high level, right? I mean, that's what they judge players on. And so, with Jacob Gall, he's moving laterally at a very high level. He's getting to the second level in these run teams at a very high level. And actually, I mean, people hear Buffalo, right? They don't think great football, but this was one of the best run teams in all of America this past year. They went 6-1. They had Jared Patterson, who was a borderline All-American after rushing for nearly 150 yards a game. I mean, this was a great offensive line, and he was the highest rated run and pass blocker on it. So I think to add a guy like that to Baylor's lineup, look, I mean, there's going to be an adjustment just getting used to that level. The good news, right, is that you got Siaki Ika in practice to kind of go against to get used to that. But I think that he's going to be somebody who's going to slot right in as a starter, either at left guard or at center, and have a chance to be an instant contributor for an offensive line that, I mean, again, talking to the staff over the summer, they need some guys to step up.
And it felt that way all season long was, man, we can't even get a play started. I mean, there was nothing that was cohesive on the offensive line. Not a matter of talent, it felt like, because there are guys that came from UCLA that had played a lot of football and guys that had played a lot of football at Baylor, but they just couldn't put it together. So hopefully it's a different scenario this year. But I want to talk about the guy that'll be ideally behind that offensive line. What's your assessment of this quarterback battle? I know it's only spring and we saw very limited sample sizes from all these guys. Is there a guy that you like right now out of those 3 or 4?
Yeah, it's such a tough battle, honestly. I mean, I think that you look at that and any one of those 3 guys, and I mean, even I don't think Kyron Jones is going to start, but talent-wise, I mean, he's up there with any of them, right? I mean, I think it's pretty wide open. I'd say that so far, I mean, Jacob Zeno kind of seems like the name that keeps coming out. I mean, obviously, when he was able to get protection when he played before, I mean, he obviously has that crazy arm, right? And I know that with this scheme and with this offense, they need to attack down the field. He's their best downfield passer in a lot of ways. The flip side of that, right, is you look at a Gary Bohannon and you even look at a Blake Shapen. I think that they move better, right? I think that they're able to kind of get after it and they're able to kind of deal with maybe obviously an offensive line that's still going to be a work in progress. If I had to pick one right now, I think Zeno is probably the guy, but for me, I think the guy who's going to be a dark horse heading into fall camp, especially as he's able to kind of really focus on football, I think Blake Shapen is a really interesting option. I think that he proved over the course of the spring that he does have the arm to play in this offense, to keep attacking down the field. He doesn't have the greatest arm of the bunch. I mean, he's third out of those 3, but I think that he clearly has a strong enough arm to be able to play in this offense. And, I think that in a lot of ways, he reminds me, he's the one out of the 3 that reminds me the most of Zach Wilson. Now, Zach Wilson is 1-1, right? I mean, he is his own guy. He was the number 2 pick in the NFL draft, all these records, all these numbers, right? But I think that in terms of a guy who can do the arm angle thing, I think being a baseball player has really helped Blake Shapen out in terms of moving around. I think he's the dark horse to play. Now, Gary Bohannon, too, I think he definitely has a chance to start. I mean, he's arguably, one of the most physically gifted of the 3, tremendously strong arm, can move outside of the pocket. But I really don't know. I mean, this is as open a quarterback battle as I can remember. But if I had to pick now, I think I'd go Zeno. But I think that Shapen's going to make a real case in the fall.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm glad you mentioned Shapen. He's a comp that I mentioned Zach Wilson on our show on Uptempo, which is 11 to 2 on weekdays, shameless plug. But also Baker Mayfield's a name that I feel like sort of comps well with him, with kind of being the undersized guy, not the most electric arm, but can still make plays, especially with his feet. Now, I look across this roster and I just see there's so much talent in all these skill positions where I'm thinking, I mean, you can kind of be okay with any of these 3, right? Like I'm thinking, is Baylor really 2 wins better with any of these quarterbacks? Is that an ignorant thought to think that you could probably play any of these guys and maybe be within a game of what you would be if you have Zeno, if you have Bohannon? Like, does your record change a lot? Maybe that's an ignorant thought, but that's just kind of where my mind is, given how much talent they have with these skill players.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that there's going to be so many eyes on this position, right? I mean, it's the quarterback position. They're replacing a guy who's a 4-year starter, obviously, led Baylor to a Big 12 title game. I mean, it's everybody's going to be looking at that spot, but I do think that you're right, that it's going to depend a lot on what's going on around them, right? I mean, I think that whichever quarterback ends up starting, if this line can't come together, it's not going to matter. We saw that a lot last season. And the flip side of that, right? I mean, you have this group of running backs. You had Abram Smith back to the mix, who, I've heard a little bit, could potentially be in line for a starting job after moving back from linebacker. And then you mix it with those receivers. I mean, Tyquan Thornton was a name that we didn't get to hear last year because they couldn't protect long enough to get him the ball. And you mix that with an R.J. Sneed. You mix in some of these other guys, even a Drew Estrada who transferred, obviously. I mean, you've got so many weapons. You mentioned it. And so I do think that you're right, that it's probably not going to be the most important battle that happens is at that quarterback position. The biggest thing that I'll say is that I probably want them to try to be decisive, right? I want them to make a decision because I think that the way that you shape your offense heading into the fall, the way that you shape your game plan heading into games, I think that that's going to change based on who you have under center. I think that, obviously with the Jacobs, you're going to want to have to, try to create a clean pocket. You're going to want to try to make things easy for him, and so that you can let him deal. And I think that with the Shapen, I think even with the Bohannon, with the Shapen, maybe you're rolling him out a bit more to try to pass. And I think with the Gary Bohannon, maybe you're running more zone read. Maybe you're running more, getting outside the pocket as well. So I'm curious to see what they do. And I hope that they kind of make that decision quickly because I think that it's going to, in that way, shape the way that the offense looks.
Oh, 100%. And with that being said, what's the ideal timeline for you in terms of naming a starter? Like, is game 3, game 4 with Kansas, is that too soon? I mean, excuse me, is that too soon? Is that too late in the process if you're having a guy by Kansas?
Yeah, I'm really curious, right, from their perspective. I feel like you definitely have the ability to play multiple quarterbacks, like you mentioned, through those first couple of weeks of the season. I mean, Baylor doesn't play too much of a losable game up until that point. But, the thing that you say too, right, is that you don't want a guy to have to only get the full reps, the full first team starting reps for the first time when you start playing Big 12 competition, right? I think for me, I'm not saying they have to stick with the guy, but I think that you want at least that week of practice for the game. And I'd argue maybe another week before that too. That's me, right? And talking to Jeff Grimes, it sounds like he wants to make a decision sooner rather than later. Now, again, nobody's emerged. Nobody's kind of wrested away that starting job. I think that they're going to want to do it in the middle of fall camp so that they get a legit amount of time to prepare. But, I mean, like you mentioned, I think that you could see any of those guys get reps. And obviously playing some of these, not the best non-conference schedule, the flip side of that is you do get an opportunity, even if it's in the second half, to potentially get some reps.
And I want to correct myself. Game 4 is actually Iowa State. So if they don't have somebody by Iowa State, we got problems.
Right.
We got problems, Sean. Now, let me ask you this question, be just sort of blunt. How good can this team be? I mean, I actually made a video and said, hey, I think they have the talent, maybe with some things to go their way. Maybe they don't win the Big 12. They can probably be in that upper 3 teams to compete for it. Again, that's a lot of things going your way. That's assuming you find a gold mine at quarterback. How good can this team be in your mind?
So there is one team, right, in Oklahoma. They're so far above everybody else. I don't even think it's that close. I think they could be a legit preseason top 3 team. I wouldn't argue too much if you rank them preseason number 1. I think this is their best team since 2008 at least, right? And so they're just different plans, like not even worth having that conversation. After that, I mean, I think Iowa State is a better team than Baylor, even sort of the best version of the Baylor, but they're not unimpeachably so. I think that TCU, I mean, they returned so much. They should be that 3rd team. But, I mean, I don't think that anybody 2 through 9 is set in stone by any means. I think that almost any of those teams, I think, could finish in almost any one of those places. Now, obviously, I don't expect Iowa State to finish 9th by any means, but I think that middle class of the Big 12 this upcoming year, because also so many players are coming back with a super senior year or just another year of eligibility, I think that it's going to be as competitive a Big 12 as there's been this past couple of years, just because I think that middle is going to be so strong. Now, the flip side of that is I think that if you can be a team that elevates itself 5% more, right, I think you can beat all those teams. I don't think that there's anybody on the schedule outside of Oklahoma who's totally unbeatable. So if I had to pick right now, right, I mean, certainly you'd expect, obviously, for Baylor to be back, in a bowl game, back competing for 7-8 wins. But the ceiling, I think the one factor that can potentially change that to another level is that quarterback, right? If you do get great quarterback play, I think that's the last step. Because I look at this defense, and this defense is crazy, right? You add Siaki Ika to the mix. I think that defensive line was that last piece. And then you look at the secondary, I think it's one of the best secondaries in the Big 12. You look at that linebacking core, it's my favorite linebacking core in a lot of ways in the Big 12. And defensive line, again, I think that you're going to get a lot more from it because you have that gap filler inside. And so I look at that defense and I'm like, there's no reason that this defense can't be a top 1-2 defense in the Big 12, right? I think it's all there. And so you look at last year, right? I mean, they finished 2-7, but like the flip side of that, right, is they won 2 games basically without fielding an offense in a lot of ways,
yes.
right? So I don't think that it will take that much improvement for this team to not just be better, but to be pretty good, right? And so, and then you add to the mix again. You add back 3 non-conference games, right? Which Baylor didn't get to play last year, and that obviously makes your season feel a whole lot better, right? I mean, 5-6 or whatever feels a lot better than 2-6, right, or 2-7. And so I think that it's not going to take that much for Baylor to look a lot better than they did last year. Again, we'll see whether they have maybe the upside to break into that top group. But I don't think outside of Oklahoma, I don't think anybody's unimpeachably better. So, competing for 8-9 wins, I think that's certainly in play.
Yeah, I mean, this defense is good enough, it feels like, to keep them in virtually every single game they play. And I'm so glad you said that. They won 2 games last year without an offense. Like, it was the most bizarre thing to watch. And so I'm very excited to see how they do with the easier non-conference and with a full season, with a full off season is going to be crucial. How many wins does this team need to get for you to feel comfortable about David Aranda? Is there like a number there for you where it's like, okay, if they get 5-6 wins, I'm okay with this?
Yeah, I think that to feel okay, I think that they have to go 6-6. I think they have to make a bowl game, and I think they have to do it relatively comfortably. I'm not saying that they have to like crush teams on the way to it, but I think that if you get to 6-6, like, there shouldn't be any sort of pressure on him. I think that you kind of feel like things are moving in the right direction. And the other thing too is that, okay, if it is 5-7 instead of 6-6, for example, right? If you're competitive in these games, if you look like you belong on the field, right? Because there were games last year. I mean, I was at that Oklahoma State game, right? That can't happen under any circumstances again next year, right? Like, they can't play games like that. Again, other than maybe Oklahoma, they can play a game like that. But other than that, you can't play another game like that. You can't be blown out. You can't look outclassed on a football field again. But I think that if they get 6-6, they'll feel fine about it. And what's funny is I look back again to the Matt Rule years, and they went 1-11, they went 7-6, and then they go 11-3, right? And the funny thing about it is, I feel like their records were so like not representative of how good those teams were, right? I felt like at 1-11, that team was so much better than 1-11, right? They were to me, in terms of quality, a 4 or 5 win team, right? And then you go to year 2, maybe 6-6 probably is about what they were, right? They were about an average team, maybe slightly above average team. And then, I mean, I think that, not to get down the Charlie Brewer discussion, I think that it's such a testament to Charlie Brewer that they were able to come away in those late game situations and win 11 games. I don't think that team was anywhere close to being the kind of caliber of a team that usually wins 11 games. And so I kind of feel like that last year, right? Like, you watch that Baylor team and you're like, how is this team going 2-7? This team is not a 2-7 team, right? This is a better team than that. And now you head into this year. I mean, I think it's kind of like that second year under Matt Rule, where it's just like, okay, and the funny thing about it, right? If Matt Rule goes 4-8 to 7-6 to, even 11, right? People aren't that excited about it. It's because he got kind of that whole wave, right? That everybody was like, oh man, 1-11 to 11-1, right? But I think that I look at this team again. They were a lot better in their record last year, in my opinion. So, I don't think that they need to take a huge step to be a 6, 7, 8 win team, right? I mean, I think that's right there for them. And so I'll be excited to see if they can do it.
And I'm so glad you said that too, because there were so many games that went their way in the Sugar Bowl year that they were in to the very end this past year that just didn't go their way. It was like the bad director's cut of a lot of these different, like Texas Tech, Iowa State, all those games, just like, gosh, dang it, man. Now, you mentioned Charlie Brewer. I know he's not necessarily a Texas football player now, but he's still, born and bred in the soil. What do you see with him coming in at Utah? He's kind of the guy there from what it sounds like.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it says a lot about him that he's been able to come in and like you said, kind of lock down that position because, with Utah, they had a kid in Jake Bentley who started as a freshman at South Carolina who ended up transferring right before spring ball. Then you have a kid in Jaquindon Jackson, obviously. I mean, everybody who watched Texas high school football remembers him from the Duncanville days, transferred in from Texas. And you also had Cameron Rising, who was a quarterback, I believe, from California, who was at Texas as well. He came in with Casey Thompson, ended up transferring. So I think it says a lot about Charlie Brewer and what that staff thinks of him, that he came in and was like the guy, right? And I actually think that this is a pretty good offense for him. You know, it's a very run-based offense, so I don't think he'll be asked to do quite as much at Utah as he was asked to do at Baylor. And I think that's going to be really good for him to kind of get to be a game manager in some ways. Because you look at Tyler Huntley, who led them to, again, a 10-win season a couple of years ago. He was not the most gifted passer. And I think that Brewer, I don't want to say that Brewer's not the most gifted passer, but obviously he doesn't have the big arm, right? And I think that being accurate, being decisive, making quick decisions, I think that's going to really bode well for him at Utah. And again, just being able to lean on that run game a little bit, kind of just be a good decision maker, which Charlie Brewer has done for so much of his career. Again, I think that it's going to be a really good fit for him. I think that they've got a system over there that works. They've got a coaching staff over there that's accomplished a whole lot. And again, I do think it says a lot about Charlie Brewer and what he accomplished at Baylor before whatever the hell happened last year, that obviously Utah really wanted to turn over their offense.
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody in Waco just wishes nothing but the best for Charlie Brewer because he literally willed that team to a Sugar Bowl, given everything, including his body. We'll finish with this. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about the Texas Longhorns, which I know I'll probably get some heat for. A lot of people are turning off the show right now since we're talking about UT, but I am of the thought that I think Texas is probably a lot better than some people think this year. I think Steve Sarkisian's a great offensive mind, and Casey Thompson is potentially a world beater if he's anything like we saw in that bowl game. But people don't care what I think. Shehan, what do you think about this, man?
So here's my one question with Texas. Well, I mean, I got a lot of questions, but here's my one big question with Texas, okay? How does Steve Sarkisian's offense work when you take Devontae Smith and turn him into Jake Smith, right? How does it work when you take, Henry Ruggs and Jerry Jeudy and Jalen Waddle, and you turn them into, some guys who haven't done a whole lot, right? And so I think that's going to be the big question for me. Now, the flip side is, I'm not saying that Bijan Robinson is better than Najee Harris, because obviously he's not. But, I think that Bijan Robinson is a more explosive player than Najee Harris was at Alabama. And so I think that they're going to lean on him a lot. So I do trust that this offense is going to look pretty different than the one that you saw at Alabama, at least at first. And you mentioned Casey Thompson. I think that he has a lot of upside. Hudson Card, if he comes in and wins the job, I think it says a lot about him too. I think that they're going to be set at that quarterback position. I'm curious again about those receivers because I feel like I've heard every year, right? Like this is the year the Texas receivers, man, they're going to break out. And I'm not even thinking it's a talent thing, right? I mean, I think Jordan Humphrey, he had a great year, right? I think Devin Duvernay, he had a great year, but I think that they just haven't done a lot of good things to kind of make best use of the talent that they have and haven't developed those guys at a very high level, in my opinion. And so now you bring in some guys, I think Andre Coleman did a pretty good job with the wide receivers last year as wide receivers coach. Well, now you get an offense that's really going to ask them to do a lot. You're going to have to win every one-on-one matchup. You're going to have to get into space. You're going to have to run routes at a really high level. And on top of that, you're going to have to do that in an offense that's asking you to do different things than what Tom Herman was asking you to do. So, look, I think that Steve Sarkisian is long-term going to be a really good fit for Texas. I think he's going to, create those sort of top 10 offenses that you saw him create at Alabama. But I really am curious in this first year, not even getting to the defensive side of the ball where you lose the Joe Sosai, Caden Stearns, some really good players. That's really my big question, right? If Steve Sarkisian is able to come in and put Jake Smith and put Josh Moore and put these guys in really good situations, if Jordan Whittington can stay healthy, obviously, I think that obviously there's a lot of upside there. There's always high upside at Texas, right? But I am curious, heading to a new conference, and by the way, a conference that's made to stop offenses like Steve Sarkisian, which is something that I don't think that he's necessarily used to. I'm curious if there's going to be a little bit of a learning curve just to kind of get his feet underneath them. And by the way, I got to mention, they open with Louisiana and Arkansas in their first two games. I think those are two games, not that they're going to lose either or both, but those are losable games. The fact that you don't get any sort of honeymoon period before you kind of start your career at Texas, I mean, that's pretty tough. So I think that Texas is going to be, by the end of the year, a much better team than they were at the beginning of the year. But I'm curious, in terms of just record, right? I don't know exactly what that looks like.
Yeah, they do not get a cakewalk, first of all, in that non-conference. I'm glad you said that. And also hitting what you said, it is definitely high upside year in and year out. They are always, it seems like the sexy pick to be in the playoff or to be in the Big 12 championship conversation. But Shehan, thanks so much for coming on, man. We'll end here with a Bear Games question. What is your favorite Baylor tradition, being a Baylor alum?
My favorite Baylor tradition, man, I think that you have to go with running the Baylor line, right? Like even when I was a reporter, right? I mean, people who know me a little bit, like my last 3 years there, I was with the newspaper, I was with the morning news, doing all the reporting stuff. At my senior game, which was, I don't know if you guys remember the Baylor Texas game where Baylor had to play without a quarterback.
I was there. Oh yeah, I was there.
Yep. Good time. But I had to, even though I had a credential and even though I had to cover the game and even though I had to write about it, I was like, you guys need to cover me for a second because I'm going to go run the line for the last time because, man, that's the sort of tradition, man. That's once in a lifetime stuff. And I think it's so cool that Baylor does that and that they really emphasize the freshmen. I think that's one of the coolest things that they do, that they kind of, the moment that you get here are like, you guys are the superstars. You guys kind of get the opportunity to do the coolest thing that we do here. So I think, yeah, for me, it's running the Baylor line.
Man, that's fantastic. Can't think of a better answer than that. Shehan, thank you so much for coming on. Again, it's Shehan Jeyarajah with Dave Campbell's Texas Football, best in the business, the college football insider for them, covering the entire state of Texas, every single college school there. He's got you covered. Shehan, thanks for coming on, boss.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Go ahead. Don't go anywhere. We're coming right.
Yeah, right back. We came right back to Uptempo for Celebrity Birthdays. All right, everybody, cue that music. Celebrity birthday number 1. This one comes from the great state of Alabama. Zach Heron, pop singer.